Hello y'all, and welcome back to the channel. I am sitting here in beautiful Manitou Park in Spokane, Washington. And I figured I got this time right here. I don't need any tools or anything like that. All it's going to be is me giving some thoughts about porting. And I figured what better environment to do it in than sitting here in a beautiful park. So here we go. This is for Walt. Walt is a subscriber. I believe he's in Australia. Been communicating with him back and forth a little bit over email. And he is doing his first ever port job on a Poulan 3700. And he's, if not retired, close to retirement gentleman that's just wanting to play around and have fun. And he's really self-conscious about asking me for help. I don't mind it at all, Walt. As a matter of fact, this is going to make great content for the channel. I'm happy to do it. So, what we have here for his Poulan 3700, it was a mildly scored, burnt up cylinder. He cleaned up the cylinder cleaned up fine, it looks good. And he actually made thin rings using, I believe, rings for a Husky 61. And anyways, I can't really explain how he was doing it. He made this little jig, sort of like a cylinder that he cut out a spot for the rings, and then he sanded down. It held the ring in place so that he could, I think, put it on a belt sander and sand it down to the thickness that he needed. And then he built another jig so he could heat it up and get it to the right roundness. Really, honestly, ingenious. And I mean, I don't know if that was his idea or if it was passed on to him. Either way, it's fantastic. And maybe someday I'll use that. But his numbers, with the base gasket, he's got 55 degrees of squish. And that gives him an exhaust opening of 99. Very typical for those Poulans, way too high. Transfer opens at 123, so 24 degrees of blowdown. And the intake opens at 64 degrees. Not nearly enough intake. The exhaust, without the base gasket, he's got right at 32 thousandths squish, and that gives him an exhaust opening of 100 degrees, better. Transfers, still got your 24 degrees of blowdown, and intake opens at 65 degrees, better. But still, we're not good enough. So I'll talk about the ring gaps after we get through this port work stuff. So the way I see it, you've got two options there, obviously. You could run it without a base gasket and 32 thousandths squish. I think it's perfect for that saw. And I'll explain that. Here we go. Their crank bearings in those saws are caged needle bearings. And those caged needle bearings, flat out, without, no hidden code here, they are crap. They do not work nearly as well as the caged ball bearing main bearings. And so what I found whenever I built my 4000, and I think I still have issues with it, that those crank bearings can't quite hold up to really high compression. And now you may have different experiences than this. I can only speak to my experiences. So before you go saying, you're wrong, I've got this, understand I can only tell you what I know. So that's the way it is. So with my saw, I took a lot out of the squish, made it a really nice small combustion chamber. And I think that I'm running about 20 thousandths or 24 thousandths squish. And I feel like what's happening is those crank bearings move and create minuscule air leaks. Not really a problem, it's just more of a tunability problem then. You're kind of high idles and stuff from time to time. It'll never really settle in, and I think that's because I'm running too much compression on that saw. So, Walt, what I would suggest to you is staying around 30 thousandths squish. However you get it, I say stay there. If you don't cut the combustion chamber at all, then yeah, you're probably good to go down to 24 thousandths or something like that. But if you do cut that combustion chamber, I would definitely keep it up to 30 thousandths of an inch or slightly more. because those crank bearings, I feel like they move and they flex, and it allows for minuscule air leaks. Not enough to cause a problem, burn up your cylinder, not that I've seen, but enough to give you inadequate tuning results. You know, you're always kind of like, man, this thing, one minute it's got a high idle, and the other minute it's not quite there. So that covers the compression side of the story, I think. If you want to run it with just, like, without the base gasket, you just do that right there. 100 on the exhaust is still too high. You need to be at about 104, I think. And so you're just going to have to live with that. And from what I remember with those saws, you've got a really large exhaust port, so I wouldn't touch it. I wouldn't do anything. I don't think it did anything at all on my 4000 that I built. I don't think I touched the exhaust at all. The transfers, I left them. I can remember that specifically. If I did anything, I did my little, like, boost nostrils kind of thing that I like to put in there, so that they come on just a tiny bit early and get that flow going and to push the exhaust out better. But as far as raising them and making, like, you know, 18 degree blowdown or anything like that, I would suggest against that. The intake, however, you're at 64 and or 65, depending on whether or not you have a base gasket. That is way too little. So you would go, I would recommend 78 or 80 on that intake. Give it a lot more time duration, because it's got a big crankcase volume, a lot of crankcase volume, a lot of transfer port volume, and so that right there in and of itself slows down your velocity. And so what you have to do is you have to make it up with volume, and so I would recommend going to 78 or 80 on your intake, and it'll still be really runnable. No problems there. Now, that's all for basic stuff. If you have the ability to cut your squish, this is what I would recommend. I would recommend cutting your squish. You would probably start with a pretty standard 40 thousandths out of the squish, and then take a little bit off the base. It's a balance. You cut a little bit out of the squish, you cut a little bit off the base, you see what that gives you on your squish, and then look and see what it gave you on your exhaust. If your exhaust is still at 102, you go a little bit further. You got to keep dropping that cylinder down incrementally until you get your exhaust height where you want it to be. And I suggest your exhaust height being at 104. Okay? So if you're cutting the squish, that's the way you got to do it. You got to probably start off with taking 40 thousandths out of the squish, and then taking it would be even, because the 32 thousandth squish that you're getting without a base gasket, I recommend you staying there. So if you take 40 thousand out of the squish chamber, out of the combustion chamber, right, then take another 40 thousand off of the base, and then see where that puts your exhaust port. If you're still at 102, go a little bit further. But I suggest you do that until you get a combination of 104 on your exhaust opening and a 30 thousandth squish right in there, about 30 thousandth squish. And then you got to attack your intake opening. Now, since you've dropped it so much further, now your intake opening naturally is just going to be probably at about probably going to be coming open at about 72, 74 degrees, maybe 70, you know, who knows what it is. But you will increase it significantly just by lowering the cylinder. But then you'll still want to take that floor out of the intake until you get your 78 or 80 degrees on the intake opening. And again, the intake is just huge. It's way big, and so I wouldn't recommend widening it or anything like that. So just do what you got to do to get the intake to open at about 78 degrees or 80 degrees, and then all around the intake, the whole intake, get it about like a cat's tongue. You know, it'll end up being smoother than a cat's tongue, but you get the point. Just a little bit of roughness in there. And if you want to do that to the transfer ports as well, that's perfectly fine and acceptable. A lot of people do that. And yeah, do that. That'll be good. And finally, your ring gaps. You say you've got 40 thousandths of an inch on the ring gaps because it is the pins, the ring pins that are actually holding the placement of the rings is 40 thousandths of an inch. Well, depending on how your rings are set up, I think that not even depending, there's two different kinds of rings. One, they're just flat across the end, you know, just straight flat. And the other kind, they go out and dip back in to leave space for your locating pin. Either way, you want about 5 thousandths of an inch gap. So you need 5 thousandths of an inch gap for the locator pin, and you need 5 thousandths inch gap for the end gap of the rings. And that is if the end gaps actually go on the outside of that locating pin. And if they do, then you're going to have your 5 thousandths degree on the inside of the ring as well as on the outside little hook as well. If it's just flat across, then you just need to base it off of if your locating pin is 40 thousandths of an inch, then you need your gap there to be 45 thousandths of an inch. So, and you know, 46 thousandths wouldn't hurt anything, but I definitely wouldn't go to 44 thousandths because that gets hot and it swells and it's got to have someplace to go. And if it's getting pinched and locked down, well, that causes problems, you know. So there you go. Hopefully this will help you in your porting journey. And for any more questions, send me an email. It's no problem. And I just figured I'd do a video because, like I said, it makes good content, as well as, boy, if I had to write all that out, whoa, that would have been a long message. Anyways, yeah, I'm fixing to jump back in the Challenger and head to the airport and get my trip home started. Look forward to get home. It's been a fun trip, but home is there for a reason. We like it. We like to live there. We have our spaces. So with that, I bid you adieu, right?